Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Hello and welcome for today's episode of the Go for Leadership podcast. My name is Daniel and my guest today is Pieter Haas.
Go for Leadership interviews.
Pieter, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Daniel. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Pieter, like always, my first question. Maybe you can introduce yourself to our audience in 30 seconds.
In 30 seconds? Well, in 30 seconds might be a little bit difficult, but as quickly as possible. 58 years old, an Austrian national with a Dutch background, as you may hear in my English accent, living in Germany, married to a French wife, so quite international. My background is that I worked for about 35 years in big corporate organizations, and for the last 5 years, I've changed my focus a little bit and work as advisor, investor, and board member for smaller companies, also for bigger companies in combination with private equity. So I'm have a little bit more freedom than I used to have.
Awesome. So you're a very experienced leader. And for me, it's always key to understand better how you would define leadership, or what is leadership to you personally?
Well, I don't think you become a leader on one day. I think it's a gliding scale. When you enter in the work environment, you already have trouble to manage yourself, to be on time, to get your tasks done. I think the next development becomes then that you manage other people. So making sure that other people get their work done. And not on a black and white point in time, but on a gliding scale, you get more and more into a leadership position. And I think there's a couple of big differences between a manager role and a leader role. I think in today's world, it would be good to say that, you know, a manager has subordinates, a leader has followers. A manager looks at the present, a leader looks at the future. So it's not a point, you don't wake up one day and all of a sudden you're no longer a manager, you're a leader. It's a gradual process. But the leader is the one who makes sure that the organization survives in 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now. The manager makes sure that the operational day-to-day business is done. So that would be sort of a very rough definition for me, that where's the difference and when do you become a leader?
So could you explain to me a little bit better or in more detail how maybe people go into a certain path? Do you think if you are a good manager, you can become also a good leader, or vice versa?
Well, vice versa is almost a requirement to become a good leader, because if you don't manage yourself, if you cannot manage others, I think it's quite difficult to become a real leader. Of course, there's exceptions. If you look at startups, young people starting a new idea, founding a company, sometimes cannot even manage themselves, and they're still required to be a leader also. So I think that's a different type of leadership. But in larger organizations and in the corporate world that I worked for many, many years in, I think you cannot be a leader without going through the path of managing yourself first and then managing others also. The other way around, there's no guarantee that, and there's no necessity that every manager becomes a leader. And I think it's quite obvious that there's much more managers than there are leaders. So I think the set of, not skills, because skills are trainable, but the set of character traits necessary to be a real leader is actually quite different from being a manager. So, and again, it's not something that happens overnight, but it's a development that not everybody will go through, that not everybody can go through, and probably not everybody should go through, because a company doesn't need 5,000 leaders. You may need 500 or many managers, but you don't need that many leaders. So I don't believe that every manager becomes a leader. I don't think that every good manager is a good leader, for that matter.
So as you are part of or has been part of smaller and larger organizations, do you think there is a good trait or a good path for, let's say, young executives or young managers, so to say, to support them in their journey to become great leaders?
Well, I don't think that leaders are born. I do believe that certain characteristics of people are necessary very early in their life to become later in their lives good leaders. So that's not something you can develop. I think what companies can do is they can nurture the leadership talent, they can develop the leadership talent. I think that a more mature leader, a more balanced leader learns how to play with different elements of leadership. give you an example. I think that both listening and talking or communicating are two very important characteristics of a leader. And I think if you are a less experienced leader, you might focus more on one or the other. I think if you're a more senior leader, you learn how to balance and how to play with it. You know when to listen and when to talk. You know when to talk about operations and you know when to talk about strategy. So I think that is something that can be developed and can be that you can support younger leaders to see that and to learn that. I do believe that there's a number of characteristics that is almost impossible to train. So they're not skills. You cannot send somebody to a leadership seminar and all of a sudden he becomes a great leader. I don't believe that happens, but you can develop it. So I think that's what organizations need to do. They need to look at the characteristics of their managers and see who of the managers have the talent to become good leaders. And they're quite different characteristics in many ways. As I said before, the manager looks at today's business, the leader looks at tomorrow's business. So you need to find ways to find out whether a good manager has also got the talent to go one step further and to not just focus on operations, but also on strategy.
I think to re-emphasize what you just said is it's always also important to put, let's say, the right position or put the right person in the right position, right? Sometimes you need a manager and sometimes you just need a leader. It depends on the challenges maybe the company or the company or the team has to resolve. Now, in these challenging times now, not talking about COVID too much, but we have seen so many issues or challenges arising these days with supply chains, with COVID, with other challenges that companies have. How do you think leaders can prepare themselves to guide companies or organizations through the times of uncertainty?
Yeah, it is indeed very interesting times. And a lot of more senior leaders actually come from a time that there were not that many changes. I can talk a little bit about my experience with the largest company I was CEO of, Media Saturn, because we were right in the middle of that. There was a nice quote I read a couple of months ago that innovation has never been as fast as it is today, and innovation has never been as slow as it is today. And that's both at the same time, because I do believe that things will only start changing even faster. So you have a lot of senior leaders used to decades of they thought they were very much changing themselves, but in reality, it was improving, it was changing, it was restructuring, cost saving, but it was not really transforming. And today's world asks in many, many industries, and probably in a couple of years in every single industry, does not ask for optimization or for restructuring. It asks for real transformation. And that is a challenge that really a lot of leaders have, because they were used to small changes and name them innovations. They were used to thinking within the box and still think they were very innovative companies. And that's a challenge, I think, for every single leader. It also means that, there's this nice saying, you need to learn from your mistakes, but things are going so fast that you don't have the time to learn from your own mistakes. You have to look at other people, look at other industries. Let me give you an example of my own old company. Media Saturn was hit by the digital transformation already 2007, 2008, 2009. Other industries are just going through this now. If you look at do-it-yourself, for example, do-it-yourself is now in exactly the same situation that MediaMarkt was 12, 13 years ago. Now, if I would now be running a do-it-yourself chain, I would look at these industries. I would not look what they did in 2012. I would look at what they do now, because you almost have like a glass bowl in front of you where you can see what the future will bring. Still, a lot of managers, a lot of leaders of these companies go exactly through the same steps that we went through in 2010, 11, 12, 13, instead of looking what the new industries, the industries that already have been transformed, are doing into 2021 or 2022. And I think that is a real challenge, because what we defined in the past as change is nothing compared to what is happening in today's world, and with the speed that things are happening. And we got the chance, we did a lot of things wrong at Media Saturn, but we still had the time in those days to try again. and we were still given a chance to try again. In today's world, if you miss one big transformation, you're out of business. So already in 10 years, in just one decade, the speed of transformation and the need of transformation has increased tremendously. And that is, I think, one of the biggest challenges for leaders, because leading change is for many leaders, although they always thought they were very innovative, they were really not, as I said before. And leading change is one of the biggest challenges. And it's so difficult because one part of you tries to hold on to the past. You don't want to change because you were always successful with what you did. Yeah, and just think about something you are doing very well, and you've always done very well, and you've always got great grades or made a lot of profit with doing something. And then somebody comes and says, well, you better start doing something else because you will start losing money with this. Even if your brain understands it, every other part of your body will resist it and will say, well, it's not going to happen that fast. And we're just going to focus on being even better. Then the first restructuring comes and people try to save themselves into the future, and more cost cutting comes, and it gets only worse and worse and worse. Even in today's world, you have food retailers saying that they stop doing food e-commerce because they cannot make money with it. And it's the same what we did in 2008. MediaMarkt closed their web shop in 2008 because management at the time thought we cannot make a profit with it. So we stop it. And it took us 4 years to come to the conclusion, well, maybe this was not such a good idea. And again, then we still had the time to correct our mistakes. But in today's world, people will not have the time to make these mistakes up and to find the right way forward. So I think that is really, you're hitting it on the nail. That's really one of the key challenges. How long can you keep the old business model, and how soon do you need to start disrupting yourself? And most companies, most leaders, unfortunately, wait until they are disrupted by somebody else. Only very little have the courage to disrupt themselves and to kill their own business model, because they know if they don't do it, somebody else will do it. And it's a much stronger proposition, obviously, to be in control of your own destiny and not wait for somebody else to kill your company.
Absolutely. And I think what would be really interesting to learn from you is now reflecting, of course, how fast maybe you could stimulate change in a larger organization like MediaMarkt Saturn, or maybe also startups, right? Maybe they even have also same challenges ahead. Maybe they go into a wrong direction and need to disrupt themselves again to another direction. Maybe a product launch has not been successful, or they needed to re-innovate their value proposition. So do you think it is a difference in comparison larger versus smaller organizations to disrupt or to influence, let's say, change?
Yeah, I think there are differences. And there's also on the other side similarities, because the first thing is you need to do something very unnatural. I believe that our brain in basic is not meant to change. You know, we still have a Neanderthal brain, and we're still focusing on survival and not on innovation. And so the first thing you have to do is you really have to, that's why leaders are real leaders are so rare, because you have to do something that is basically unnatural. Even if the situation is not ideal, people try to stay within the world they know. People try to stay within the borders and the boundaries of what they know. So the first thing you need to do is to be an example and to go beyond that, to think outside of the box, to find solutions that are not obvious. And you cannot do that on your own, because no leader on its own can change a company. You need to set a culture that encourages that. And a very important part of encouraging change is to encourage failure. And I'll give you a nice example of what was one of the lessons I learned many years ago when I was actually in Silicon Valley visiting eBay. And the eBay people did a presentation, and they asked us, we were a delegation of MediaMarkt, and they asked us, do you know what people are paid the most in Silicon Valley? I have no idea whether it's true, but it was actually quite a nice story. And as we said, no, we don't. We said maybe data analysts or maybe strategy people, or we don't know. And they said, no, actually, it's the people that go bankrupt. And they explained that, in Silicon Valley, nobody knows what the future is really going to look like. Everybody's trying like mad to find the next unicorn and to build the next great company. the people that went bankrupt have a huge advantage on everybody else because they know what does not work and they will not make the same mistake again. So a lot of companies, a lot of the big companies in Silicon Valley hire people that went bankrupt because they have an experience that is unpayable. Now, that's a completely different mindset. Yeah, we think about people that failed, we fire them. Yeah, we kick them out. So you need to create an atmosphere where it is okay to fail, where it is okay to try something new. Of course, not forever, but that's a completely different set of thinking. And I think a lot of companies have problems with that because they have a legacy. And there's nice examples of that also. You're a little bit younger than I am, but in 1972, a 16-year-old German girl won the high jumping event at the Olympics in Munich. And a lot of people are asking themselves, how can a 16-year-old girl win the Olympics? Because she has not trained as many years as all those experienced athletes. And the answer to it was a couple of years before, I think in 1968 or 1967, an American guy called Dick Fosbury invented the Fosbury flop. So instead of jumping forward, they were jumping backward. Now, the big advantage that the little German girl had was that she never learned to jump forward. So she only learned to jump backward. So she had no legacy. And all the other athletes that had been world champions and Olympic champions for years all had to first stop doing something before they could actually start training like she did all her life. She started when she was 12 with athletics, and she never learned something else than the Fosbury flop. So she won the Olympic title and was many years successful after that. And the interesting thing was that when this Dick Fosbury invented his Fosbury flop, people tried to disqualify him because it was not fair. He was not playing by the books. He was not playing by the rules. And that's, I think, a big difference for corporates, because corporates think like that. This is not fair. You cannot do it this way. And small startup companies, they didn't know it was not allowed. They have no rules, so they have no legacy, and they can be, in theory, much, much faster. They all come to this point then where it's going from just one leader that has everything under control, and then you need to scale up and so ultimately managing becomes more important. So in small companies, often you do have a leader, but you have no management, and it's chaos. And sometimes it's coordinated chaos. And sometimes these companies survive and sometimes they collapse because of the chaos. But in an older company, specifically older companies that have been successful for many, many, many years, the big trap is the trap of profits, the trap of status quo, and the trap of not being willing to change. And that is something that is extremely strong in the organization. And you need to talk to people who had been doing the same thing for many, many years. I remember that at Media Saturn, we had this structure where every media market was buying their own products. So a lot of people in a media market, a local media market, would be buyers. And then we changed the model because of digital and because of online, and we had centralized assortments and we had centralized pricing. And I went on the trip to the stores, and I was really enthusiastic because I was telling all these buyers, hey, don't worry, there's a great future because we're all going to be customer centric now, and we're all going to be focusing on the customer, and you're going to be the chief customer officer. And these people were sitting there and they were extremely sad and extremely demotivated until one guy said to me, but Pieter, we don't want to be customer oriented. We want to be buyers. Yeah, because they'd been buyers for 15 years. And the buyers were the guys who were invited by the brands to go to Korea or to go to Japan or to go to nice evenings or go to the IFA in Berlin. So they were not willing. They had no interest to change. So we had this great leadership vision of becoming a customer-centric, multi-channel company, but the rest of the company didn't share that vision. The rest of the company wasn't ready to join us. Again, in a startup, people join because they want to follow the leader. They want to follow the person with the idea. So they have a huge advantage over the old company because everybody is motivated to focus on this new idea. Everybody is motivated to kill the old companies. And in an older company, you have to overcome all this past, all this legacy, and to get everybody on board. And that's not a management responsibility, that's true leadership. Because then you need followers, because you're telling them, let's move forward. We're going to fail probably, And then you cannot instruct people to do that. You can only have people motivated to follow you. And that's a big difference between, that was your question, between smaller companies and large companies.
Wow, I mean, that's, I think, a very profound answer. And it shows very nicely that, like you said at the beginning, right, it has both difficulties. It's a little bit different, of course, but it has both difficulties. So if you now review a little bit, what is more appealing, let's say, to support smaller companies and with your experience and this, let's say, challenging times, or is it more appealing to you to have really a larger corporation and bring it to the next level or to the next innovation?
Actually, I learn more and more that a lot of the things that you learn in a large corporation, it doesn't mean that large corporations have large problems and small companies have small problems. Quite the opposite. So a lot of the things that I learned in running a big company is exactly the same in a small company also. There's differences, as I explained before, but some of the fundamentals of leadership are exactly the same. It's about communication, it's about trust, it's about empathy, it's about vision. And that's the same whether you're a 10-person company or a 55,000-person company. Yeah, if leaders don't show those skills and don't show that kind of working and thinking, and I've learned that, so there's not that much differences. I've also learned, by the way, that's also interesting maybe to talk briefly about, that if you go through these management seminars, you learn all these things about, when in Rome, act like the Romans. And so we did a lot of work in China, in the United States, in England, in Russia. And I've learned over time that, the best recipe is to just stay yourself. And of course, you try to avoid insulting people. But I've stopped, if I'm in China, nobody in China believes I'm Chinese anyway. So they know I'm from Germany. They know I don't know all the characteristics of China. And they are very cultivated people. So they will adjust as much to me as I adjust to them. And if I have one or two basic things that are just not done because you insult people, but don't try to become Chinese or Russian or Dutch if you go there. And I learned with my Dutch background, for example, it's actually quite helpful to just remain quite Dutch when you're working in Germany. You have much more freedom. You're allowed to say things that you would never be allowed to say if you would be real German. So one lesson I learned also in terms of leadership is just be yourself. If you're German, be German. If you're English, be English. Everybody knows where you're from. So I think that's definitely a wrong advised thing in many intercultural courses, that you need to rethink yourself completely and rewire yourself and sort of be Chinese or be Russian in order to be successful as a leader or as a manager in those countries. So that's just a little sidestep, but something that triggered, because you were talking about larger and smaller companies, triggered me.
Awesome. I think that maybe also a very interesting aspect that I would be very interested is how do you see cultural differences in terms of leadership? Do you think that, for example, I don't know, specific, let's say, cultures have tendencies to create, let's say, I won't say better leaders, but leaders that maybe, let's say, are more visionary than others, or can maybe solve problems than others? Do you think that there might be also influences by the culture? Is it that maybe also a reason why so many, let's say, leadership programs ask to go traveling around the globe to expand the horizon, let's say, or work with different cultures?
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. And I'll give you a very interesting example when we talk about it, because I do believe there's huge differences. I don't believe that the core elements of good leadership are different. I do believe that that the way in which you can show that is completely different. Let me give you an example. Maybe some of the core things. I think empathy is important in every single organization, in every single country in the world I've worked in. And maybe the magnitude of empathy is different, but people like to be treated nice, and people need to be like to be treated with respect. So I think that's core capabilities that leaders need to have. But we were opening stores in Turkey many years ago with MediaMarkt. And we thought we had a very good idea because we had a lot of Turkish colleagues, obviously, in Germany, in Switzerland, in Austria. And we thought, well, that's a great benefit, because if we take these Turkish colleagues in those countries and we bring them to Turkey, they speak Turkish and they speak German. So it's much easier to communicate with them. So the first leader we had in Turkey, the country manager, was actually a Turkish guy from Switzerland. And we brought him to Turkey. And when he was talking to the people there in Turkey, we thought it sounded pretty Turkish because we couldn't understand it. And still, the whole leadership idea of him being there failed completely. And it took us quite some time to find out why, because we thought we had a Turkish leader. Actually, the Turkish people didn't think they had a Turkish leader. They thought they had a Swiss leader that was talking Turkish very, very badly. Half of the time they couldn't understand him. And he had a lot of attitudes and characteristics that were not at all appreciated. Actually, Turkish people living in Turkey don't like foreign Turkish people coming to Turkey and telling real Turkish people what to do. And we missed that completely. So we thought we had a real Turkish leader. And at the end of the day, it failed completely. And it only worked when we had, and I was always saying, when we had a real Turkish leader at a later stage in our development. So, and again, it was not different in fundamentals. It was just different in small characteristics. So yes, there's definitely a way in which you then behave if you are a leader in Turkey. In fundamental characteristics, it's the same, but in details, it's completely different. You need to understand the tonality. You need to understand how to make a joke. You need to understand what is accepted behavior and what is not accepted behavior. And yes, so that's the answer to your question. Yes, there is definitely differences in leadership styles. I don't believe there's that many differences in leadership fundamentals, unless you go, let me make that point very clear. That's probably true for like the more Western world. If you go into completely other different countries, I think leadership in North Korea is something completely different. So don't get me wrong that it's the same all over the world. In Western societies, in my experience, because I worked there, including Russia, that principle applies as I just explained it.
Wow. Maybe to come to an end, because I think we could speak hours, Pieter. What would be the advice you would have given the younger Pieter when he started his career, now with your background and with all the experience you have gained so far?
Well, when I did my MBA, very long time ago, I just interviewed somebody today, just finishing his MBA to join one of the companies I work with. And I told him, you probably think that you can now be the CEO of any company because you've done an MBA, so you know everything. And he was laughing about it. And I explained to him my sort of, not management philosophy, but almost my life principle. And I think that is actually one of the very important characteristics for any good leader. And if you look at my CV, my life motto or my life philosophy is reach for the stars, but stay on the ground. And I think that's an important characteristic for every single leader. I think if you're a real leader, you need to be able to talk to the receptionist as well as to a co-managing director or a board member. You need to be able to talk to people in the stores, in the factory. And there's nobody is too important to be nice, is a nice saying. And I think that staying with both feet on the ground, even if you become a leader after going through being a manager and managing other people and managing yourself, I think even then, staying with both feet on the ground, be very, very ambitious. Reach for the stars, but stay on the ground would be my advice to anybody who wants to be not just a leader, but anybody who wants to be just a nice and successful human being.
Go for Leadership, the podcast with Daniel and Gert.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Pieter, for being our guest today.
Talk to you soon. Thanks, Daniel.
Go for Leadership, the podcast.